Hare Radha Madhava Kunja Vihare Vijana Vallabha Girivaradhare Vijana Vallabha Girivaradhare Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Vijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjan Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna Hare Krishna Hare Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Hare Krishna Hare Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Hare Krishna Hare Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Hare Rama, 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 Hare Hare. Radha Damodara, Radha Damodara, Radha Damodara, Shri Radhe, Radha Damodara, Shri Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada. Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Prabhupada Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Welcome to this morning Srimad Bhagavatam class. Today we are speaking from 6th Canto, Prescribed Duties for Mankind, chapter 16, entitled King Chitraketu Meets the Supreme Personality, the Supreme Lord. Text 39. Narayanam namaskrityam naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayam dirayet nashtaprayashva bhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavatutama shloke bhaktir bhavati naishtiki kamadiyasvairachita na paramarohanti yatakaram babijani yanan manya guna maye gunaganato sya dvandva jalani kamadiyasvairachita na paramarohanti yatakaram babijani yanatmanya guna maye gunaganato sya dvandva jalani. Would anyone like to try to read the verse?
Kamadhyastvai rachita na paramarohanti yata karamba bijani gyanatman yaguna maye guna gyanato syadvandva jalani.
Thank you, Prabhu. Anyone else? Kamadhiyaha. Desires for sense gratification. Dvayi in you. Rachitaha. Performed. Na, not. Parama, O Supreme Personality. Godhead. Rohanti. Who grow. Produce other bodies. Yata. Just as. Galambhabhijani. Sterilized or fried seeds. Jnana Atmani in you, whose existence is in full knowledge. Agunamaye, who is not affected by the material qualities. Gunaganataha, from the material qualities. Asya, of a person. Dwanda Jalani, networks of duality. Translation. O Supreme Lord, the persons obsessed with material desires for sense gratification through material opulence worship you, who are the source of all knowledge and are transcendental to material qualities. They are not subject to material rebirth, just as sterilized or fried seeds do not produce plants. Living entities are subjected to the repetition of birth and death because they are conditioned by material nature. But since you are transcendental, one who is inclined to associate with you in transcendence escapes the conditions of material nature. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 4:9, where the Lord says, Janma karma chame divyam evangyo veti tattvataha yaktva deham punarjanma naiti mam eti sorjuna. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his rebirth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, or Arjuna. If one simply engages in Krishna consciousness to understand Krishna, he surely becomes immune to the process of repeated birth and death. As clearly stated in Bhagavad Gita, Yaktva dehang punarjanma naiti. Such a person, simply by engaging in Krishna consciousness or understanding the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, becomes quite fit to return home back to Godhead. Even those who are obsessed with material desires may also come to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead so steadily that they go back to Godhead. The fact is that if one comes to Krishna consciousness, although he may have many material desires, he becomes increasingly attracted to the lotus feet of Krishna through associating with the Supreme Lord by chanting his holy name. The Supreme Lord and his holy name are identical. Thus, he becomes uninterested in attachment to material enjoyment. The perfection of life is to be uninterested in material enjoyment. and interested in Krishna. If one comes to Krishna consciousness somehow or other, even for material gain, the result is that he will be liberated. Kama dveshat bhayat snehat. Whether for the satisfaction of material desires, because of the influence of envy, because of fear, because of affection, or because of any other reason, if one comes to Krishna, his life is successful. Om Gyana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmilitanyena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prashta Bhutale Shumate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarne. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Ramadiya Swai Rachita, Na Parama Rohanti Yata Karamba Bijani. Yanat Manya Gunamaye, Gunaganatos Sia Dwanda Jalani. O Supreme Lord, if persons obsessed with material desires for sense gratification through material opulence worship you, who are the source of all knowledge and are transcendental to material qualities, they are not subject to material rebirth, just as sterilized or fried seeds do not produce plants. Living entities are subjected to the repetition of birth and death because they are conditioned by material nature. But since you are transcendental, one who is inclined to associate with you in transcendence escapes the conditions of material nature. Chitraketu has met the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Ananta Shesha, and he is offering his prayers. And this is a personal testimony that he is given. The Upadhi, or designation that he had as a king with many subjects, many citizens, many wives, ministers, treasury, land holdings. Under Chitraketu's watch, there were many living entities and a lot of property that was under his care. And so, even though all these living entities deserve to be protected, still, the impetus for giving protection was material, that I'm a king, these are my subjects, and they are under my care. In other words, I am mine. So all designations are underpinned by this false conception, which is driven by the false ego, I and mine. And so because of this, it was material, the impetus. And such motivations actually continue a person's implication in the cycle of birth and death. So this designation actually binds the living entity to matter. Even though the living entity is always pure and spirit soul, we are simply covered. We are never, just as air, in descriptions given in Bhagavatam in the first canto, that the air, if one says the air is dirty or the air has become foggy, it's actually incorrect. It's that the air is just a carrier of particles of matter. So, um, so the air, if somebody is driving or the cows are walking and it's a dry summer day, very hot, dry, no breeze, and they kick up a lot of dust, uh, it appears that the air has become dusty. But in fact, all that's happening is that the particles of dust are suspended in the air. So the air itself actually always remains pure, because then after some time you then see when the dust settles or the fog clears that there's clear vision again. So in the same way, the living entity, as they appear in the material world, may appear through false designation that I'm a king, I'm a farmer, I'm a public intellectual, I'm an artist. It appears that way. But this is all designation, driven by the false ego. It is actually false. And so the King Chitraketu is giving it's temporary. So it is true. It's not like the Mayavadi conception, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, that it's actually false. No, the air is temporarily appearing dusty. There is some suspension of matter. Just as in our subtle body, there is a suspension of material designations. However, those are temporary because at the time of death, they are all destroyed. Some persons actually experience transmigration. The soul is always transmigrating from one body to the next. Uh, it's even been calculated by biologists, anatomical biologists, that all the cells in our body have a 7-year cycle. That every 7 years, all the cells in your body, they change. And therefore, one could say that every 7 years, you have a completely different body. But in the subtle body, uh, well, the cells are assembled in the same way in one lifetime. And so it appears that one is actually the same. So if you stay in the same country, same society, same family, maintenance of your designations, it appears that, well, I'm the same. But if you emigrate to another country, you actually can observe uh, and experience this transmigration. For example, um, these designations, there's devotees, they'll tell you, like there's one devotee in New York, older devotee, and he was, yeah, a long career dentist practicing for a very long time. He has daughters, and one of his daughters also wants to become a dentist. So he when he came, he was trying to actually become a get relicensed as well in the state of New York as a dentist, but it was difficult. So the only persons who actually recognize him as a dentist is his family and the devotees who take the risk of agreeing to open their mouth wide and have him check. So he does this as a service to devotees to do some dental work for them. But because he's moved across the ocean, the US government doesn't recognize him as a dentist. And so, if your entire identity for many years was built up as a reputable dentist, helping others, not just devotees, but also secular persons, maintain their smile, maintain hygiene in their mouth, and now all of a sudden, yeah, we don't recognize your qualification. So that's really what happens at death. Basically, material nature, whatever attachments you had, uh, whatever designations you had, if you lived in a certain way, if you lived, you attached to money, you attached to meat eating, you attached to illicit sexual enjoyment, you'll get a body accordingly. And material nature is like, well, I don't really recognize your so-called qualification that made you appear like a human because you weren't living like a human. So this is what happens at the transmigration when the soul actually moves from one body to the next. So here, so the opportunity of Krishna consciousness is this: is that if your designations are going to get destroyed anyway by death, then you might as well do it in a conscious way. So if you move to another country, there's some incentive that's causing you to move. So most people, when they come to the US, they're looking for mm, better material prosperity. Um, some of us, we are very fortunate in that we look for we look for spiritual prosperity because our spiritual master directed us to actually make the move. And so that is the opportunity, and the spiritual prosperity in Krishna consciousness appears in the form of having your material designations fried, destroyed. So devotees will use that expression if things aren't aligned in the environment, in the service, in the relationships, that, oh, I'm feeling fried now in devotional service. It's a common parlance. But what's actually happening is you are in the fire of Krishna consciousness. So this symbolic analogy is very appropriate, that Krishna consciousness is like a fire. You are performing sacrifices with your senses. You are serving the master of the senses, Rishikesh, with your senses. You're performing, uh, you are trying to remember Krishna. You're trying to keep up with your schedule, keep up with your chanting. Um, so you want to actually spend quality time with Krishna, not keep Krishna on the back burner. And then there's all other duties for keeping body and soul together, uh, keeping you, the servant, and your ashram together. So you want to maintain that situation. So in the friction, so friction arises in that you're trying to do it in the material world. And the material world is there's a cycle, of birth and death, and it's a wheel of time, as described in the Bhagavatam. And this wheel, the cycle of birth and death, is being pushed by time, by the Kala Shakti. And this pushing is trying to actually cause living entities to procreate. So this is what's actually going on. So what's keeping the living entities bound to the cycle of birth and death is this sex desire. So there's a constant pushing. And so friction arises from trying to go against this pushing. And so when you look at Varnashram, really it's to deal with sex desire in a way that's progressive. Uh, in all the three ashrams, in three out of the four ashrams, uh, there's no license for sexual enjoyment, and in the fourth one, that license is only given for the purposes of procreation, for the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition. And then in other traditions and progressive religious societies, it's that it's only with one partner. In other words, it is actually regulated. So when you look at all the Vedic injunctions, it's really to fry um, this sex desire at its root, and that is to fry it at the root of I and mine. So these restrictions are there, ultimately come to this point of Krishna consciousness where even if you're allowed to uh, indulge in sex desire, then it's only for the purposes of procreation. Otherwise, not. And if you don't, then you actually are halfway liberated. So, so this, because it's a constant, mm, you have to maintain a certain lifestyle. Um, it's not easy because the mind is pushing, the sense objects are running towards the senses. This is described by Uddhava to Krishna. I can't see how the living entity can ever escape the cycle of birth and death because the senses are constantly running towards the objects of the senses. And material nature is pushing the sense objects towards the senses. So I can never see any separation occurring. And if there's no separation, how can the living entity ever become free from this? So it's done through frying. So Prabhupada, he quotes an important verse. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode or Arjuna. Purport. The Lord's descent from his transcendental abode is already explained in the sixth verse. One who can understand the truth of the appearance of the personality of Godhead is already liberated from material bondage, and therefore he returns to the kingdom of God immediately after quitting his material body. Such liberation of the living entity from material bondage is not at all easy. The impersonalists and the yogis attain liberation only after much trouble and many, many births. Even then, the liberation they achieve, merging into the impersonal Brahma Jyotir of the Lord, is only partial, and there is a risk of returning to this material world. But the devotee, simply by understanding the transcendental nature of the body and the activities of the Lord, attains the abode of the Lord after ending this body and does not run the risk of returning to this material world. In the Brahma Samhita 533, it is stated that the Lord has many, many forms and incarnations. Dvaitam Achyutam Ananda Nadim Anantarupam. Although there are many transcendental forms of the Lord, they are still one and the same Supreme Personality of Godhead. One has to understand this fact with conviction, although it is incomprehensible to mundane scholars and empiric philosophers. So Prabhupada is highlighting two things here, is that it's difficult and even from to actually get liberated. Right? So intrinsically, the gravitational force, if you like, that's binding the living entity to one place is the sex desire. And we can understand that from that viewpoint, from an existential viewpoint. You can also understand how difficult it is even to leave this planet, as we've described in previous classes, even to go to the next near planet, the most powerful government on Earth, the US government has said that travel to Mars will take 30 years to actually develop the necessary technology. Of course, the next question is, how did we go to the moon? But yes, it actually didn't. As Prabhupada said, and many skeptics have said, there's a lot of evidence now that's become mainstream to demonstrate that this didn't, in fact, happen. As we've described in previous classes, one of the things that prevents manned manned flight to the nearest planet is what they call the Van Allen belt field of radiation, or the Van Allen field of radiation. So literally, Earth is actually a prison. This is how the Lord has designed uh, designed the Earth planet and other planets as well. There's some binding force. And so this is a field that if you go through it, the radiation is too intense for the human body to actually tolerate. Higher order living entities with advanced technology can go through this field. But then, as the Bhagavatam describes, in this even sixth canto, we've been learning how Indra is bound up. So even if you can go through intense fields of radiation, you have the technology to travel to different planetary systems, still you are bound to actually taking birth. So it's not easy. So the way you actually do it is you do it the Lord's way. And part of the Lord's way is to understand how he appears and disappears um, in different forms. So it's like when you are studying different uh, fields of different forms of transportation, you get taught the underlying technology. So with what's mainstream now is mainstream knowledge about how spacecraft work is that we use jet propulsion. So basically, you compress gases, you compress them, and then you blow them and you propel them through a nozzle. So when you propel them through a nozzle, they accelerate. And so because they accelerate at very high speeds, faster than the speed of sound, then you can propel your vehicle faster than the speed of sound. So that's in general how jet propulsion, or really basically how jet propulsion works. What's not non-mainstream, what's non-mainstream is there's other forms of propulsion. For example, the Alcubierre drive. And the way that works is that you bend space. And so by bending space, you can actually, space is always trying to think the way we, in our parlance, it's the Akash. So basically, you're trying to create a wave in the Akash. And so the Akash is always wanting to go into equilibrium. And when you distort it that way, and then it tries to bounce back, it pushes you forward. So this is uh, a means of propulsion faster than the speed of light travel. So the idea is that by understanding these different propulsion methods through space, then you can move yourself very quickly. So you can adopt a technological means because you understand the different means of propulsion. So in the same way, with understanding Advaitam Achutam Anadim Anantarupam, that the Lord, it's the same Lord when he's appearing as Nrsimha, he's appearing as Varaha, and how the Lord is never touched by the material, he's never touched by the the material energy. How the Lord, even when the universe comes into being, he glances at material nature, Maya, who's not in the causal ocean, she's outside. So they never actually come together. So the Lord he impregnates Maya just with these glance. And in that glance, the living entity that desires from the previous cycle of creation, where their actual material desires exist. Um, so if the Lord is purely spiritual, how is it that these material desires of the living entities are part of this glance? So understanding the intricacies of that, you actually then understand how you can do it yourself. So when you apply yourself in bhakti yoga, then it's like you're thinking, okay, the Lord is never touched by the spiritual, by the material energy. The Lord never gets angry for material reasons. The Lord gets angry when he's living into, when his parts and parcels aren't protected. Um, the Lord is not part, he is, um, he is impartial. He is equal to everyone. And at the same time, he is also partial to his devotees. So understanding all these characteristics about the Lord, then you as a practitioner when you are now faced with you're being quote unquote fried in devotional service, you're experiencing challenges and uh, executing your determination in devotional service. You want to chant your rounds with the highest quality, but then you can't. You're trying to move to a new ashram. You're short of money. So all these uh, causes of friction, causes of heat in your life, you then remember the Lord, how the Lord is actually Dvaita Machutam Anadim Ananta Rupam, the way he's actually hearing but not being touched by the material energy, you get the intelligence on how to do it. You get the intelligence on how to Prabhupada Ki Jai, that the material energy is trying to compromise my principles. I'm short of money. I need extra money. Um, so how am I going to maintain my principles? Even though I need this energy of the Lord, this specific aspect of the material energy of the Lord to maintain my my spiritual life. And how am I actually going to do it? And when you do it successfully, yes, uh, the cause of it is because you've remembered how the Lord is actually doing it. Yeah. So because you're associating with the Lord through remembrance, then you actually are frying it. You're frying that designation that is causing that friction. So, you know, recently, I think Madhupan Leela was citing this example by Guru Maharaj that he's been speaking about the importance of car protection. So here at Gita Nagari, when you are engaged in the practice of protecting cows, you understand how much it takes to produce ahimsa dairy. And so in the current free market world, it's become expensive to the relative costs of producing ahimsa dairy are fairly high. And so one could say that, yes, it's actually too expensive to buy this. So even though Krishna wants us, the principle by which we should live by is that Krishna wants us to protect cows, and this is through the will. This desire is being transmitted through the parampara, and our param guru, Srila Prabhupada, he wants this. This is what he wants. So it's expensive, but the response is that it's expensive. So I'm a struggling devotee. I can't afford $18 a gallon. So if you're in a part of the world where there's himsa dairy and it's available, so Guru Maharaj has been speaking, saying that, well, speaking to devotees where himsa dairy is available, but it's not being bought up completely. Uh, so devotees are giving the reason that it's too expensive. So then he gives the example that, well, okay, I hear you, it's expensive. But then, following that same logic, you're sending money to India, to your mother, to your grandmother. And it's expensive to do this. And so we should, I think the most economical solution is just to have them terminated so that you don't have to spend this money. Oh, no, but Maharaj, we can't do it. Um, why? Well, you can't do it because you want to prosecute your life a certain way by a certain principle. Principle is Kula Dharma. You should protect your your family members, your dependents. So, in the same way, by giving the reason that we can't follow certain, we can't follow a desire that the Lord wants, that Prabhupada wants, uh, because it's expensive in terms of money, it's expensive in terms of time. Basically, what's happening is that your principles are being compromised by the material energy. And you're losing out on an opportunity to fry this I and mind. But if you actually do it the Lord's way, then, and you really tax your brain on how to do, because the point is, it's not easy, but you really want to do this because this is what the Lord wants, then you have a full opportunity to, um, then that endeavor actually purifies this designation, I and mine. It's not my money, it's Krishna's money, my ability to go to work, my ability to generate this money. This is all Krishna. Money is the energy of Krishna. So Krishna wants it this way. Okay, we're going to spend an extra $14 per gallon on milk per week. And if you calculate it, it works out to like an extra 700 per year, right? Per gallon of milk. So if it's a family of four and you are consuming 2 gallons of milk, then it works out to 1,400. So then you look at it, you're like, well, I think we can generate an extra 1,400, or we can not spend on something else. Um, and this is really what, when Prabhupada wants to give us, he's giving us a difficult thing to do, quote unquote. It's difficult in this time, in the times that we live in. But we should see it that it's an opportunity to actually have the seed fried of I and mine. And when it's fried, then you actually have a wonderful story of transformation to tell. Chitraketu, he's given his testimony. His story is so wonderful that it's appearing in the Bhagavatam, that he had everything he ever wanted. Any material thing that somebody wants, um, now, 5,000 years ago, 50,000, 5 million years ago, uh, and then 5,000 years in the future, 50,000. What Chitraketu achieved is so rare, from a material point of view, that yes, it belongs in eternal scripture like the Bhagavatam. 10 million wives, uh, just really wide kingdom, a lot of sovereignty, property. Um, so it's very rare, that kind of material achievement, that kind of wealth that he achieved. And yet there was one thing that he didn't have, and that was a son. So he's demonstrating in his own personal example that there will always be one thing in the material world that you can't have. And the Lord, through his devotees, Angira and Narada Rishi, gave him that. And they gave it to him in such a way, that um, he didn't want it. That his son was brought back to, he died, his son was killed through uh, a material machination, envy, one of the forces in material society. And he was brought back to life, the son. And when the son spoke to him, and his mother, his wife, and he flatly said, "Who is my mother? Who is my father?" Because in so many lifetimes, I have this mother, I've had that mother. So who exactly is my mother? It can't be you, because before I appeared in this, I had another mother. So I've had so many mothers. Who is my mother? Who is my father? So this question made Chitraketu sober. Yes, made him sober, and it dissipated um, the ignorance that was born from this I and mine. Mm. So then afterwards, then he was given a mantra by Narada Muni, And while chanting this mantra, chanting this in the state of consciousness of just being completely free from this desire to actually have a son, then he could understand that Dvaitam Achutam Anadim Ananta Rupam. And that's why he's offering such wonderful prayers to the Lord in the form of Shesha. Yes, and so the same opportunity exists for us, is that whatever difficult situation we find ourselves in, either because we are trying to move into an ashram, move out of an ashram, we're trying to move occupations, we're trying to raise children, we're trying to raise cows. Um, this is all an opportunity to fry the seed of I and mine through the fire of devotional service. Are there any reflections or intentions? Today is Akadashi, or Ratini Akadashi. Just read something. Ratini Akadashi is most mercifully descends in the month of Vaishaka, April or May, and is described in details in a conversation between Sri Krishna and Yudhishthir Maharaj. Once upon a time, the sublime king Yudhishthir asked the Lord, "Please explain to me the process for observing this Ekadashi, which takes place during the waning moon in the month of Vaishaka. What is the process for observing this Ekadashi, and what results may be obtained by such practice?" Lord Krishna replied, "My dear Raja, the name of this Ekadashi is Varukini, and it awards one greatly intrinsic fortune, both in this life and the next. By following the vow of Ekadashi, one obtains perpetual happiness, and his sinful reactions dwindle as a as of a as a diminuendo. By following such a vow, an unfortunate wife grows fortunate. The lame man may leap, and a blind man see. A human being attains prosperity in this life and the next. And even without realizing so, an animal may be liberated from the cycle of birth and death. Many saintly kings, such as Gundumara and Jambudra, became liberated by following this delectable and most transcendental grace of Aritini Kadashi. So the Lord then describes why it's so auspicious. So, yes, our purpose, our intention, remember, even though we can approach the Lord for material desires, akama, sarvakama, va moksha kama daradi, tivrena bhakti yogena yajeta purusham param. That even if you're full of desires, approach Krishna. But our purpose today of following Ekadashi is to fry these desires. And so we do that by minimizing our eating and just our material activity for the purposes of remembering Krishna more, so that we can understand how he's Advaitam, Achutam, Anadim, Nanta, Rupam. Yes, devotees, the floor is yours.
Krishna.
People,
Thank you for your class. I was just reflecting. Yesterday, I ran into Mother Jambavati, and she was saying how Bhakti Swami would remind them to focus on what they have and not what they don't have. And I was just thinking about how you were talking about how Chitraketu Maharaj, he had so much. He had everything, but he was focusing on the one thing he didn't have, the sun. So I was just thinking about that. Like, how can we also apply in our own lives? Like, focus on what we have and what we don't have, versus what we don't have.
Yes. And that's achieved by seeing that what I have is actually Krishna's. So if you're Krishna conscious, then you will see Krishna everywhere in your life. And because Krishna is so satisfying, then you can just focus on what you have because it's Krishna's. Um, so by focusing on what we don't have, you are seeing an absence. It's because of an absence of Krishna consciousness. And the living entity being part and parcel of Krishna, he actually wants to be with Krishna. So if you're seeing Krishna in your life, then you've achieved what you want. So even for devotees as well, they can observe this, is that when I'm observing what I don't have, it's because I'm not seeing Krishna. I am forgetful of Krishna. But if I remember Krishna, then, I will see Krishna everywhere in my life. So, yes, thank you for that reminder. And as a way to like fry this I and mine conception.
That is like this verse in Bhagavad Gita 6:30. Yo mam pashyati sarvatra sarvam cha mai pashyati tasyaham na pranashyami sachamena pranashyati. For one who sees me everywhere and sees everything in me, I am never lost, nor is he ever lost to me.
Yes, thank you for that Shastric evidence. Yes. So even if you're seeing $0 in your bank account or negative because of credit, um, if you if you see Krishna, then you're not seeing the absence of what you don't have, but you're perceiving, oh yes, we have Krishna, and therefore everything we will conquer. Ram Vijayate, Sri Krishna Sankirtana. That just simply by being faithful to the principles of Krishna consciousness, Param Vijayate, Sri Krishna Sankirtana. Thakur Prabhu,
Hare Krishna. Thank you
Hare
for
Krishna.
a wonderful and engaging class. I just wanted to add that when we sometimes advise focusing on what we have rather than what we don't have, the purpose is because non-devotees will also say this. Their objective is to try to achieve happiness, and so in their conception, if they focus on what they have rather than what they don't have, they think that they will be happier. The devotee, on the other hand, has a different purpose. His idea is that my mind is agitated by material desires. And particularly if I'm focusing on what I don't have, I have very agitated mind, and it's hard to think of Krishna. But if I'm having difficulty to think of Krishna, I can help myself by reducing the load. So by focusing on what I have rather than what I don't have, it helps to calm the mind. It reduces the fever. It lowers the temperature, enables you to have a somewhat more peaceful mind, so that then you can think of Krishna and you can understand how what I have and even what I don't have is all made possible by the grace of Krishna. Otherwise, if the mind is very, very agitated, it's hard to think of Krishna. Um, the objective is for a devotee, the objective is not to try to achieve happiness by focusing on what we have, because a devotee understands that whatever has a beginning and an end it cannot be a source of happiness. It will always ultimately be a source of unhappiness. So he doesn't think in that way. Devotee's objective is not to try to be happy by thinking about what he has. That's the non-devotee's endeavor. But our purpose is just to try to be peaceful so that we can think of Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, Prabhu, for that important addition. Yes, as Prabhupada said in the purport, um, the process of this liberation is associating with Krishna, you become uninterested, so you develop a high taste. And so, as you are saying, um, yes, one of the pitfalls to developing a high taste is to recognize that we do have a taste for matter, and so we want to uh, follow a regimen for protecting ourselves against this lower taste. Um, and that regimen helps us to create that space where we can actually develop this high taste for Krishna. And that space is to, yeah, just not fill the mind with agitating things. So thank you, Prabhu, for that. So we have from the comment, thanks from Madhupan Leela Devi. Thanks for the mathematical calculation of how much it'll cost for the milk yearly. It's not really that much if it's important to us. Jana, appreciating the answer. Everything belongs to Krishna. Let us not take pleasure in what has a beginning and an end. Okay, thank you, dear devotees. Have an auspicious Ekadashi. Ranchard Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Nitai Gaur Premanande. Haribol.